The term conspiracy theory has come to mean in common parlance that something is a fishy idea, not a fishy conduct, but in fact that the person offering the idea is being fishy. What conspiracy means is actually just an agreement, a plan among people they don't share with a lot of other people, that is, roughly speaking, in secret. That happens all the time. It happens every day. And I don't say that because I think that there's weird stuff being done to make it rain when otherwise it wouldn't rain. I mean that you do that a lot. In a surprise party that you plan, in something that you're going to do at your job to release a new product or to let go a team member. Agreements happen all the time without other people knowing them. And in fact, in the halls of power, they happen also, all the time. And very often they have consequence. And theorizing about them, rather than being poo-pooed, should be analyzed like any other hypothesis, based on facts, analyzed and evaluated for whether one story seems more plausible and lines up with the facts better than some other story, some other conspiracy theory. Because it's always a conspiracy theory, unless you believe that everything everyone says is always transparent, and we know that that is absurd. Jonathan Chait just wrote an article. He might have been working on it for a while. It's been making the rounds of the internet. We are honored to have him here. And in it, he says, what if it's worse than you think? What if what Glenn Greenwald has called pathological, the concern about Russian interference with this White House, with this president, with this government, and with these recent elections, what if it's as bad as you can imagine and worse than you think? What if there's a 20% chance of that, a 10% chance of that? What might that story look like, and why would it matter? Jonathan Chait joins us now. This is our moment for conspiracy theory, and by that I mean hypothesizing about what people might have done without telling everybody else what they were doing. Jonathan, hello. Jonathan, talk to us about the article. What prompted you to write it?
Well, I've been following this story from the beginning. In 2016, in the summer of 2016, not many people took seriously the notion that Russia was doing anything untoward with relation to Trump or the election. The notion that they were interfering in the election at all was pretty far out, and nobody took it seriously. In fact, the initial reports about the hacking of the DNC just assumed that Russia was just trying to get more information and was not trying to help anybody in the election. So as we've learned more, people have grown more and more accepting of the idea that Russia was helping Trump, and even that Trump was welcoming that help to some level. But I think there's a chance that it just goes even deeper than we think, and or at least we don't know how far it goes. And there's been an assumption that we do know. There's an assumption that at every stage that it's only going a little bit further than we think, and we keep getting surprised. So I want to try to responsibly game out in this article what it would look like if it goes farther by assembling, all the facts and being reasonable about it, and not saying, well, this can only be explained by that, and if we know that, then therefore that, and therefore another thing. That's how you do a conspiracy theory that goes awry. And there are a lot of conspiracy theories that make those kinds of errors. So I'm just trying to use trustworthy, publicly verified sources and just put it together. Like, what do we think? What are the probabilities? What are the possibilities? And how deep could it go? So that's what I tried to do. And
by how deep it could go, you include and focus on, I guess, the relationship. And you say, what if the next summit, I think that it was, what if the next summit between Trump and Putin is not merely a discussion among foreign leaders or national leaders, but what if it is in fact a source meeting with his handler, Putin being the handler. And you say that there's a chance, and I know it is hard. I mean, the challenge with the big lie, the challenge of the big deceit is it's so hard to believe that the good news isn't true because it disrupts our cognitive dissonance so very much. And I think that's why your story is important. New York Magazine is what it's in. I sometimes get it confused with the New Yorker. Correct me if I'm wrong. Although I've lived in New York, I don't see the world through the spoon of Manhattan.
Okay.
And you make the case, or at least hypothesize.
Yes, it is New York Magazine. You're right that it's New York and not the New Yorker.
Thank you very much. And you make the case that, or at least put out the hypothesis, that the relationship between Russia and Trump, that Putin and Trump, it might not have, not only may not have been accidental, it may have been, or it may not have been recent. And in fact, it may have started in 1987. Make that case.
Well, this is just an odd coincidence that hasn't gotten enough attention. It's probably just an odd coincidence, which is that people always say, well, Donald Trump has believed this stuff about America's allies for forever. But he hasn't really believed forever. And what you're seeing, with him attacking NATO is not what he's believed forever. He's only believed it since 1987. And in 1987, he went to Moscow after having been sort of courted and flattered a little bit by some Russian officials in New York. He went and visited Moscow. Luke Harding, a Guardian journalist, has a really good book that gets into this in more detail. So he goes to Moscow, talks about building something in Moscow for the first time, which didn't happen. Has this great meeting with the Soviets, and then comes back and within 2 months is talking about running for president for the first time, and is paying more than $100,000 of his own money to pay full-page ads, attacking America's allies for the first time. And it's a familiar message now, saying, why are we protecting them? Why are we spending our money to protect them? And of course, what he didn't say in there is that we are protecting them from Russia and the Soviets. And this did align very closely with Soviet foreign policy goals and Russian foreign policy goals to this day of splitting the U.S. away from its allies. So again, probably a coincidence, but why do you say probably a coincidence to maintain journalistic integrity and not to sound too beyond the current state of the conversation? Or do you say probably because you actually think it's probably? Because, I don't know, it being a coincidence doesn't necessarily seem any more or less likely than it not being a coincidence. If I had to bet my own money, I would probably say it's a coincidence. But I don't know. I mean, I just don't. But you're right to put some pressure on that. I mean, I can't assess the odds. It's really, really hard to say. You're right. I mean, I said, what if it's 10 or 20%? But that's kind of throwing a figure out there. I really don't know. It would not be beyond Soviet intelligence to put a bug in someone's ears, to encourage them to take up these themes, to say, because they did like to identify people who have a future and future leaders and try to gain different kinds of influence over them, sometimes with blackmail, sometimes with bribes, sometimes with other forms of influence. Or maybe, it could have just been something as simple as flattering him and playing to his ego and saying, like, America really needs a leader who's going to say this and that. It's a big hole out there that you could fill. That could easily be the case.
Because to me, when I look at the facts as they stack up, and I'll offer a few facts, and I ask you that pile on, but we can also try to tear it down. But let's try to pile on some facts. So Donald Trump comes and starts making pronouncements about foreign policy that are in alignment with the desires of the Russian state, that relate to the United States weakening its alliances with its key allies and making those, as he is going now, similarly to how he's going now, to criticize NATO, to criticize Canada, to praise the separation forces that want to separate coalition power, and that he started doing that 2 months after visiting Russia. And then now you have very clear that there were, in fact, Russian bots, that every intelligence agency were saying were trying to elect Donald Trump. And you have, I don't know, a dozen people, 3 people, somewhere between at least a half a dozen people with Russian ties some degree of Russian ties who were appointed to his administration, that his campaign manager was an operative for, remind people of the Manafort connection, because not, oh, Manafort, Trump, Russia, blah, and then maybe we forget. Because at some point we start piling this stuff up, and coincidence feels like much less likely than not coincidence. But remind people of Manafort and other key details you think people might be forgetting.
Well, sure. Let me pull out even more, because to say that Russia is interfering in an election in forging covert ties with the party here sounds much less crazy if you understand that they have done this time and time and time again. There's no controversy over this. They've done this in more than half a dozen elections in Europe, building ties with right-wing parties that they see as having some kind of common ideological goal, and often courting the leaders of those parties with bribes. And one of the clearest cases is an election in Ukraine, where Russia had a strong interest, and they backed a pro-Russian party and backed his political interests. And the person who ran this campaign is Paul Manafort. So Paul Manafort is running a pro-Russian political operation in Ukraine immediately before he comes to run Donald Trump's campaign.
So not only do they have a tradition, a habit of getting involved in other elections, but they get and planting the person that they want, but they have used Paul Manafort to do that very thing, and then Paul Manafort, by maybe not coincidence, ends up being working for the Trump administration. We're about to go to break.
Same guy. Well, no, he's not in the administration. No, he was never in.
Not administration. Excuse me. The campaign.
Yeah.
The campaign. So the plug the article. Where can people check it out? What's your Twitter feed? Mine's at Jefferson D. Smith, and I have posted it. What's yours? Where can people check it out?
My Twitter feed is at Jonathan Chait, Jonathan with an ANCHAIT, and nymag.com is the
All right. website. Hang with us, listeners. We're going to be back with Jonathan Chait. We're going to be back with your phone calls. I'm Jefferson Smith. Fun stuff, except scary. And we've got to stay together to be less scared. This is Thom Hartmann Show.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program, and there's a lot going on. I'm Jeff. Jonathan Chait is with us. His article in New York Magazine hypothesizing of what if it's worse than we think. What if the relationship between Donald Trump and Putin is that between a subject and his handler? So you have the Manafort campaign link. What are other facts that you think people miss as we're choosing between these ideas of it's just a grand coincidence or, in fact, it is a grand conspiracy?
So, first of all, let me just back up and say that by handler, I don't think people should think that Trump is a Manchurian candidate, that he's, speaking privately in Russian with Putin, is operating under direct control. Russian intelligence influences people at lots of different levels. And it could be something as simple as flattery. There could well be blackmail or financial leverage. Because now to get into your question, there's clearly been a lot of Russian money. Both of Trump's sons admitted that they have been gotten a lot of money from Russia. And this started happening after traditional banks would no longer lend money to Donald Trump because he stiffs his creditors. He doesn't pay them back. So he gets a big infusion of Russian funds. We don't know the whole map of this because he doesn't release his tax returns. But that's a pretty big source of leverage. And you need to understand that Russia doesn't invest solely to maximize its returns. Russia invests money with political goals in mind. And the Russian economy is like this hybrid of state control and free market where you've got these state-linked oligarchs who control everything. And so they like to dangle these kind of can't-lose deals before people so you can basically hide a bribe underneath the cover of a legitimate business transaction.
Yeah, and they have, and amplifying that, many Russian oligarchs got their dough because of relationships with the Russian state and Russian intelligence, and not only because if they violated the desires of the Russian state, they would have had it, but also even more often, more closely than that. So what else? What else do you think people are missing?
I make a great deal out of the things that John Brennan, the former CIA head, has said publicly. I put that pretty high in my piece. I think it got far too little attention. So first of all, Brennan was briefed by European intelligence agencies who recorded conversations of Russian officials talking about the Trump campaign and their ties to the Trump campaign. So the Europeans hear the Russians talking about the Trump campaign and in some level of involvement. They go to Washington and brief John Brennan, the CIA director, about these conversations. John Brennan has not said what he heard. Those recordings have not come out. But Brennan has said, first of all, basically that Trump or someone with him is committing treason. He's talked about how people go down the treasonous path and they realize it's too late that they're on the treasonous path. And he said that he thinks Putin has influence over Donald Trump. He has some kind of blackmail, something over his head. So to relate to what you're saying before about a conspiracy theory, one of the ironies here is that conspiracy theories often say that the government is hiding something from us. And the organ of government that's the most frequent target of conspiracy theories is the CIA. But here, the actual head of the CIA is the one who's promoting this theory.
He's the one. You have the CIA saying, yeah, there is, in fact, in this case, a conspiracy. Jonathan Shea, New York Magazine, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your article.
All right. Thanks for having me.
This is Thom Hartmann Show. We'll be back.